I got a 2019 Mac Pro. Let's talk. Before we start, subscribe if you're new and hit on the bell icon so you'll be notified every time I upload cool new videos like this. This will be a longer video. I'll leave timestamp to a different section in the description below. This way you can jump to the portions that you want to view. So here it is, the 2019 Mac Pro. It is super science right now. Granted, I am not having it process anything, but even when you push it hard, it's still really silent. So what I'm going to do is talk about how I acquired this machine, the spec of the current one that I have. If I have to go out again and configure another one, how would I configure it? How to get an Apple or purchase an Apple computer at a really great price, and what do I think about AppleCare? So those are the things I'll be discussing here. The other thing too is that I'll be giving you my justification why I got this machine compared to the 2020 iMac that Apple has just released, which are amazing performers, by the way. And I'm going to give you my review from a perspective of a pro user who is primarily a photographer and a secondary content creator, as I'm doing now, upgrading from a 2013 Mac Pro, which I have actually gone inside and upgrade many components of this machine already. In fact, most of the components have already been upgraded, and I already have run into a wall with this one. How do I feel it performs compared to the 2019 Mac Pro? Has my experience on a daily use been better, been worse? How have that been? Comparing in the programs such as Final Cut Pro, Compressor, Lightroom, and Photoshop. One more thing that I want to mention too is that I won't be giving you any specific performance benchmark. There are a lot of other websites and YouTubers that have done that already. One of them, the website that I really like, is barefeet.com, and that's by Rob Mad Scientist. I put a link to his website in the description below. Check that out because he has a lot of benchmark that he has done throughout the years, and it's just a fantastic resource that I've used. Another YouTube channel I really like, it's Mac Tech. He has a lot of great comparisons, a lot of benchmark on this machine, especially with this compared to the 2020 iMac, which we're also going to touch on as well. All right, that being said, let's talk about how I acquired this machine. Because I live in Los Angeles, California, I'm really close to Hollywood, I was able to purchase this machine used, and this one also still have almost 2.5 years of AppleCare left on it, from a production house in Hollywood. I happen to live close to this area. It makes it a little bit easier for me to acquire these machines because these production houses, composers, VFX house, they would sometimes buy extra one of these machines and not having a need for them. So I got lucky there. This machine that I purchased, if I have to configure it the same from full price, I'm saving about 25% over full price. And that is including the tax saving on it too, which I think is really just fantastic for this. If you don't live in the same geographical area I am and you want to buy an Apple at a good price, there are probably two different resources that you can use. If you have an educational credential, an EDU discount is always a great thing to do. Apple has their own EDU store and they have amazing price there. If you want to get an even better price, I highly recommend that everyone that I know that I consult for, I recommend that they go for an Apple refurbished product. An Apple refurbished product, in simple terms that I understand, is that they're not broken products that has been repaired or fixed or anything. They're pretty much products that the customer have purchased from the store or from the online store, and within 14 days they return it for whatever reason that may be. It doesn't fit their needs or whatever. Apple essentially send it back to the depot, do a refurbishment process, do a lot of checks, change the serial number, and then resell it again as a refurbished product, because if somebody have returned something, they cannot resell the product as new. So I highly recommend checking out Apple Refurbished because the saving is actually even better than the EDU store. And the other thing too about the saving on the Refurb store is that the money that you save there can be used to purchase AppleCare, which extends a manufacturer warranty from 1 year to 3 years. And for many Apple computers, I highly recommend doing that. The thing to note about the refurbished site is that you're not going to get the latest product immediately in the weeks or days after they announce them, but within a month or two, you're going to start to see some of those products start to trickle in. And that's a great time to, I think, buy an Apple computer. And the stock on Apple refurbished site can fluctuate quite a bit, even within the hour. So if you see a configuration you like, get it right away. The one thing about the computers on the refurbished side is that these are pre-configured machine already. Some of them have amazing configuration, but you really can't go in and dial in the specs that you want all the time. So that's just another thing to remember too, is that there are certain limitations on the refurb site there. Now let's move on and talk about AppleCare. I highly recommend that everyone that buy an Apple computer get an AppleCare Plus, especially if you're getting an all-in-one computer such as the iMac or their laptop, because those machines are pretty much fixed the way how they are. if something is going wrong on those machines, Apple generally replace the entire component, either the entire display or the entire logic board. There's no replacing single components on those machines. Very rarely does that happen, especially on their laptop devices. If you get an Apple laptop, get AppleCare. There's really no question about it. If you get an iMac, you do have the option, because even in the 27-inch iMac, the latest generation, what you can do is replace the processor, because that is socketed. You can also upgrade the RAM on your own, which is okay. However, if the SSD or anything goes bad, those are soldered to the board, and because they use a T2 chip, it's much better to give it to Apple for them to repair it rather than sending it into an independent repair shop. But anyway, that being said, I highly believe in AppleCare product. I even have AppleCare on these Mac Pro, which, rarely ever fails at all. The 2013, it never fails. The 2010 model I have before them, and even the 2006 Mac Pro, I never had any major issues that require a major component replacement. But that's from my perspective. Now, on the Apple laptop, on the other hand, I have a lot of issues with those that needs to go into their repair depot all the time, which is also the reason why I just proactively buy AppleCare for any of the major Apple devices that I have. So now that you know how I got this machine and how you can save money on buying an Apple product, let's talk about the spec of this machine. But before we do that, let's talk about the spec of the 2013 Mac Pro. Originally, this came with the Apple 1TB SSD, to which is still the original Apple one. I haven't gone in and update that. It's probably the one component that's user upgradable that I haven't done any upgrade on. The processor originally on this one is a quad-core 3.4 gigahertz or 3.5 gigahertz, I believe. What I have done is taken this apart and upgraded to a octa-core, an 8-core E5-2667 V2. This is the one that Apple does not offer as the standard configuration. It is 3.3 gigahertz across all the cores, so it does maintain a good speed. When I was upgrading this, I also had the option to upgrade to a 12-core one. However, the 12-core one does drop the frequency of the single core performance down quite a bit, and I still, have a lot of tasks that use single core, so I've gone with the 8-core instead on this one. The memory on this machine has been upgraded to 64 gigabytes. And yes, it is true that I can bump this up more to 128. However, when I do that, I will sacrifice the memory speed. So I didn't want to go that route. So this is the configuration that I have. This machine has a dual D500 Fire Pro video card. Not the D700. This just only have a D500, but it's working okay. Now that we have talked about the little 2013, let's talk about this Mac Pro. Starting out, because I got this machine used, for the most part, this spec is really close to what I would have gone out and configured myself. However, there are a few things that I will change, and I will share that with you. Starting out with the hard drive, this has a 2 terabyte SSD, and obviously the way how Apple does it is using 2 1 terabyte blade in this situation, and it's paired together using the Apple T2 chip. So having a 2 terabyte, I think it's actually worth it, because 1 terabyte, I'm starting to fill it up already, and that's not a good thing. So I appreciate that I have 2 terabytes of memory on this one. Moving on to the processor, this is a 12-core Xenon processor. Ideally, I might have gone for a 16-core. I'm still on the fence about that if I would have to configure one for my own. Right now, I think for this one, a 12-core 3.3 gigahertz with a boost to 4 gigahertz or so, it works well for me. I think that once AppleCare warranty is over on this one and those Xenon processor have dropped in price, I might go in and upgrade to a 16-core, even go up to a higher core count based on the price of the processor then. The other thing about the memory for this machine is I got the base memory, 32 gigabytes, and this is the memory that the person who owned this machine before me have. Ideally, I would have still got 32 gigabytes from Apple too, and what I have done is brought Nemix memory from Amazon, and it's 64 gigabytes for about $280. I think is probably one of the best values available, and right now this machine have 96 gigabytes of memory, which I think is more than enough for what I need for the tasks I do with the programs that I use on a daily basis. So I really enjoy that. One of the things that this machine is configured is a really awesome video card. Is the Radeon Vega 2 with 32 gigabytes of HBM2 high bandwidth memory too, and it's an expensive pro level video card. Have I gone out and configured this machine myself, I probably would have not gotten this video card because I don't do any of the heavy computational tasks that require this video card per se. I probably would have gone with the Radeon W5700X with 16 gigabytes of memory instead. I would say the price point is a lot more easier to swallow than this Radeon 2 card. But again, I have an awesome video card in this machine, so I like that. And there is no way at all that I would stick with the stock video card, the Radeon 580X. So I would upgrade a video card, but not quite to the extent that I have. So now that you know my configuration, let's continue and let's talk about the elephant in the room. And that is Apple moving on to Apple Silicon. And they have also just released their latest 2020 27-inch iMac that is an amazing performer. This gets into the justification part of why I want to get this machine and why this machine is worth it for me, for my type of workflow. So starting out, if you have seen any benchmark reviews of the new iMac, even the 8-core one comes really close to this 12-core Mac Pro. The 10-core one pushed it a little bit further, but not so much because, I think it's starting to run into some thermal limitations. It has an amazing option for a video card upgrade. And at literally a third or half the price of this machine, you're getting a display, a really nice display in there as well. So why the heck did I not get an iMac, and why the heck did I not wait for an Apple Silicon computer? Well, Apple Silicon, they're going to transition, but their Pro machine's probably not going to happen until probably a year and a half to 2 years down the road, right? The Pro machine's going to come towards the end. So I need a machine that I can use today, and that's the reason why I got this. Secondly, the reason why I didn't get the iMac is because, well, you guys know I'm BenQ Ambassador. I've been using hardware calibrated display for the past 5 years or so, and there's really no way for me to go back and use a software calibrated display again. I just refuse to do so. The thing with the display in the iMac is that Apple display has always been calibrated really awesome. However, the display inside the iMac is very similar to the display inside BenQ PD line. They're calibrated really well, however, they're only a software calibrated display. That means that once they have been calibrated from the factory, there's really no changing the RGB primary on those displays. So Apple Display has been calibrated to DCI-P3, which is awesome. But primarily what I do is that I'm a photographer. I like to edit my photos in Adobe RGB so that I can print out in Adobe RGB color and being able to see the colors closer to what I'm able to see. And that is an important distinction between a software versus a hardware calibrated display. So an iMac display is really great, but it's still a software calibrated one. And if you're using any smaller color space such as sRGB, Rec. 709, you're perfectly fine because those colors fit within the space. But when you start to use an Adobe RGB color space on a DCI-P3 calibrated display, you would see the comparison really stark difference between those two color gamuts and what it can and cannot show. So personally, I like using Adobe RGB, and I also do printout too because I have an Epson printer in studio. And that's why I decided to go with this machine because it gives me the flexibility of the display. In my desk setup, it's not just hook up to one 27-inch BenQ display that you see here. It's generally hooked up to two 32-inch BenQ 4K display, and that is the SW320 and the SW321C. Because I also have the PD3220U, I'm actually tinkering around and thinking about playing with a triple display setup in 4K. That should be fun. But the one thing about this machine is that the graphic card can handle those 4K displays just fine, and it doesn't even break a sweat. That's how awesome it is. So anyway, that's part of my justification why I decided to go with that. The other thing too has to do with thermal. And if you really think about it, I talk about this machine being silenced right now, and even when I push it, this machine is silenced. The one thing that I don't really like about the iMac, and this is more so of a problem in the MacBook Pro, is that you start to push it a little bit, the fan really starts to spin up really loudly. It's like a Boeing 747 trying to take off, right? And that's something that I really love about this machine, that it can really run silence. In my environment, I'm not doing a lot of sound recording, but it is something to consider if you want a silence machine running in your studio. And another thing that I mentioned earlier about configuring this machine and upgrading this machine is I like to tinker with my computers. So for instance, the 2006 very first generation Mac Pro, I have gone in once AppleCare is over. I've upgraded memory. I also upgraded the processor in those machines. The 2010 Mac Pro, that is the Mac Pro 5.1, I've gone in and upgraded the processor on that machine, and also I have upgraded the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi card on that machine so that it's AC compatible. This is something that I really enjoy about having a Mac Pro, is that you can go in there and tinker with the parts down the road. I tend to keep these computers for a very long time. I don't like to sell them out because usually if you buy them and if you keep them for a few years, the price starts to drop, I would say somewhat significantly, that it doesn't make sense to sell it off, that putting more money into upgrade for me is worth it. And as I mentioned before, I plan to upgrade the processor of this machine down the road. In fact, what I really like about this machine is that there's a lot of PCIe slot that you can put in different cards in there, so I can add in more USB 3 cards. And speaking of PCIe slots, I already have a card in there, and that is the Apricorn Velocity Dual. So they don't make this card anymore and it's running on a Marvel chip, but essentially I have two 1TB Samsung SSD paired together in RAID 1. So now I have 2 TB of 800 megabytes per second storage. Primarily, I need more storage, and the 800 megabytes per second works for me right now. That card is a recycled card from my old Mac Pro, but it works really just fine this machine. But being able to populate these cards down the road is another thing that I really like and enjoy about having a Mac Pro. And just the component, the modularity of it, essentially being able to go in and put in different cards at any given time is something that I find worthwhile. Granted, you can also add hard drive to this machine, and I will be honest with you that my original intention was to buy this machine and get the different caddies to put in the hard drive in here. But sadly, this machine has reprogrammed the way how I think that I kind of like this machine running silenced the way how it is without any hard drive hooked up to it. So right now I'm using a lot of external hard drive, and I'm using my Synology RAID system as a drive for storage rather than putting any extra hard drive in this machine to increase the heat, increase the noise, and also the weight of the machine. So I haven't done that, but I might do that in the future or get caddies for SSD. You can also get PCIe slots that can host NVMe drives, and you can pair all those together in RAID 1 and get 500 or 6,000 megabyte per second, some ridiculous speed. I don't feel that is a good time for me to get that right now. I don't feel that I need that type of storage. So between the 2 terabyte built-in storage, which is super fast, and the 2 terabyte extra storage on the Velocity Dual card, it gets about 800 megabyte per second. I'm able to offload my videos and my photo edits on there and be able to back it up on an external SSD, which, you know, it works fine for me right now. But the expansion capability of it is something that I really enjoy about this machine. And just down the road, I love to tinker with my machines, so I love to go in and upgrade them. Two more things I want to touch on regarding upgradability. One of them is RAM. I mentioned before that I got 64 gigabytes of RAM from Amazon for about $280, which I think is an amazing value compared to the other Mac Pros that I've purchased before. But down the road, the price are going to drop even more, and that means I can add even more RAM into the system. Do I need it? Probably not, but it's actually cool to have it. And the other thing too is the video card. It's modular, you can pull it out, you can replace it with another Apple MPX module down the road, but you can also replace it with just any ordinary AMD Radeon card and it will work as well. Originally, when 2012 was around, you know, go back to then, I thought that Apple was going to release another tower and do something very similar to an MPX module where it routes the Thunderbolt signal throughout all the other ports on the machine, but they have gone with this machine instead, which is okay, but for the most part, I would say is a disappointment. The nice thing about the MPX module is that Apple have taken the video signal and rerouted to all the USB Type-C Thunderbolt 3 type connector on this computer. That makes it very easy to hook up any display to it. You simply just plug in the cable and throughout any ports it will work. This is something very different than on a PC where I still get people commenting like I try to plug in USB Type-C on my PC desktop and it works that, well, you have to plug in the cable directly into the video card. Otherwise, it doesn't work because on a PC, there's no rerouting the signal back. So that's number one. And if you're running on a PC laptop, I mean, that makes it even more complicated. Is that USB Type-C a Thunderbolt 3, Thunderbolt 4, or is it a USB Type-C? And if it's a Type-C, does it have DisplayPort overlay on top of it? You see how that gets messy really quickly, and I love the way how Apple have implemented this. What I see happening in the future is that Apple, if they're continuing to use the Radeon, that I'm hoping that they would still continue to release MPX module. As high price as they may be, I think it's a great idea just to, you know, get the Apple thing so you can get the boot screen and so forth. But if you can't get that, you can plug in any Radeon card in here, and that's another great thing about it. But knowing Apple and knowing how they have the vertical integration between software, hardware, and also the T2 chip in this machine, I wouldn't be surprised if Apple decided to go in and on their high-end machines, even with Apple Silicon, do their own Apple GPU. And with the Apple GPU, they can release an Apple GPU or an Apple Silicon GPU video card with an MPX module that you can just upgrade these Mac Pro and run on Apple Graphic. And I think if Apple have done that in the future, I think it would be really fantastic. Again, I don't have a crystal ball for that, but this is just something that I think that they may go towards. That said, let's really talk about the programs that I've used on a daily basis. Let's start with Final Cut Pro. One thing that I can tell you right now is that running in Final Cut Pro, scrubbing through the timeline is much smoother on this machine compared to the old one. And when I'm actually doing a fairly intense edit, like many of my calibration videos with so many different file layers on top, text and all these graphic and motion graphics I'm doing on there, this computer handled it much better even without rendering compared to the 2013 Mac Pro. Less stutter in those places. I mean, you still get some here and there, but I think that it does a better job, especially handling two 4K displays and also trying to preview all those content for me. So that's, for me, has been working fairly well. One thing though that I find Final Cut hasn't been performing too well is when it comes to internal recording on some of the cameras I use. For example, I film with the Panasonic S1, and I love the Panasonic S1, by the way. But when I try to record internal 10-bit 422, what happens is that every time I try to play back that footage, it just stutters a lot. And every time I try to export that footage, it seems like, the frame rate is dropping. I understand that the computer doesn't have the decoder built in, or even if it's built into the T2 chip, it has not been enabled on these machines yet. So that's just one disappointing thing, that I can't shoot 10-bit 422 internal and be able to play back the native file from the camera without any, interpolation or having to go through and transcode it to a ProRes or something like that. Because what I can simply do is plug in an SSD on the Atomos recorder that's plugged into the camera B and simply just record ProRes on there. But I didn't want to do that because I don't want to deal with the large file size that I have to archive. So, 10-bit 422 internal seems like a good thing, but I can't, do that smoothly on this machine. So that's just one disappointment there. Now let's talk about Final Cut and Compressor export. Let's talk about a 10-minute clip, 4K, 30 frames per second. On a basic clip, this machine will take, anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes to export that basic clip, where this one will take about 5 minutes or so. So we're talking about a big improvement in exporting speed and compressing speed. If I have a more complex video like my calibration videos, for a 10-minute clip, we're talking about this machine taking anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes or so, where this new Mac Pro takes about, 7.5 minutes at the very most. And I have been doing some timing on this, so it's really awesome there. The other difference too is that when this machine is compressing, I can still work in Safari, work in word processor, type in the description, the keyword for my videos, and do any other tasks, reply to emails without any problems at all. On this machine, it just struggles, even trying to do any simple task on that machine. So usually when I was using this machine, when I have something exporting out, I would just leave it running, grab my laptop, and move to the other room. For this one, what I can do is continue to work on this machine as if it's, not really doing anything at all when it's really processing the video files. And that to me is an amazing thing, because it allows me to be able to work in a timeline longer, because I know that I can export the file in a shorter amount of time. The other thing too is that if that export fails, the nice thing about it is I know I can come back in here and re-export it at a much quicker rate, rather than this one. If it fails towards the end, I have to spend that entire time again trying to compress and export everything out. So that's the big difference between the two, is having that overhead. So now let's jump into a couple of other programs that I use a lot. Let's talk first about Photoshop. How does Photoshop perform on this machine? I mean, the only thing I can say is that Photoshop performs just fluidly on this machine without any issues at all. And this is using the advanced graphics settings in Photoshop too. For this one, I have to turn it down to the basic graphics rendition in Photoshop, and it still lags in some aspect. I mean, trying to do retouching on this cylinder machine has been interesting, because there's just so much lag that comes with it, especially when you're running on a 4K display or dual 4K display. With this one, it can handle it just fine without any issues at all. And lastly, the program that I use the most in my workflow is Lightroom. How does Lightroom perform on this new machine compared to this old one? To be honest with you, running Lightroom Classic with two 4K displays have been somewhat of a mixed bag for me. So there's certain aspect of this machine was able to do much better than the 2013 Mac Pro. So for instance, when I go in on my landscape photo and I throw in a lot of localized adjustment, the gradient, graduated filter, radial filter, everything, it's able to process and keep up with those rendition, just fine. It's been perfect to use it for that. When it comes to this machine, I mean, this machine started to struggle. And a lot of times, I'm not just talking about one singular 30, 40 megapixel files. We're talking about a 400 something megapixel files. This is pretty much taking a 36 megapixel camera, stitching 12 of them together to make a panorama, and doing an edit with all those localized adjustments. This machine flawlessly handles it, where this machine struggles quite a lot. So in that aspect, we have a great performance improvement. Scrolling through images in the library module, well, it's been kind of a mixed bag. I don't feel that it's any faster on this machine, and this is running on the Pro graphic cards that Apple has to offer, the Radeon Vega 2. I mean, this is probably one of the best video cards, if any, to be running this on. But, scrolling is still slow. And it's just something that I don't enjoy using. Going to design an album in the album module is still slow, is still laggy on a 4K display. And many times what I end up doing is scaling down the resolution of one of my 4K display, and that tends to help it with the performance overall a little bit. But again, I feel that with Lightroom Classic, it's still a mixed bag with this machine. The aspect of generating one-to-one preview on import has greatly improved. The speed is awesome. And also the exporting, the speed has been awesome as well. It's about 30 to 40% faster than this Mac Pro. And that's just something that I enjoy using, because less time to export, more time to upload and do something else to it. One thing that I find though, unlike Final Cut Pro, is that if you use Lightroom to export on this machine, it still pretty much bogs down the system, meaning that if it's going through its intensive exporting tasks, sometimes Safari and everything would still stutter a little bit. But if it happens like this on this Pro machine, it will happen throughout like pretty much any Apple computer out there. And that's just something that I found between using all these Pro programs for my workflow. And while we're talking about Lightroom Classic, there's one more justification that ties into Lightroom. And the reason why having a machine with more cores like this and more memory capability, it's really something that fits me well. A lot of times what I do is that many of you guys would just run Lightroom with one catalog and one instance at any given time. There are times when I would run 3 catalogs at any given time and have them all render preview. And in worst cases, I probably have 6 or 8 catalogs running at any given time, and all those catalogs are processing files into DNG and running in parallel tasks. So being able to have a machine that has multiple cores like that, it's just something that really works well and fit into my workflow. One of the other programs that we should talk about is Bridge. And Bridge to me has been a fairly big disappointment, especially the past few releases, because it ran slow on this machine. And I thought originally it was, because of the graphic card, because of the performance. But trying Bridge on this machine, it's pretty much been the same thing. Bridge takes forever to render the file. And I tried to go in to change all the settings already, many of the settings already, and it still doesn't improve it. So I attribute that Bridge to like the programming. And I attribute some of the slowness in Lightroom Classics to programming that I feel that Adobe should go out and improve on those. But otherwise, this has been a great machine to use. And while we're talking about programs, let's talk about the daily use programs, Safari, Chrome, word processors, all those things. It's able to handle all those programs just fine. Specifically in Safari and Chrome, where I have a tendency to leave hundreds of tabs open at any given time, even when it's rendering in Final Cut Pro or exporting a file in Compressor, is able to handle all my tab obsession just perfectly fine. And that's just something that I really enjoy about this. One of the other things that I want to address is many of you that are PC users will probably be saying that, well, you can probably configure a equivalent performing machine at a much lower price. And that's probably true, especially where my needs is not quite as expensive as a music producer or composer or anything like that, especially with all the expansion cards built into the machine. But the thing though is this, I primarily work in Mac OS. I mean, I do consulting with my clients on PC all the time, and there are just quirks about PC that just drives me crazy, and I prefer to work in Mac OS. And for the most power right now, I think that this is one of the best Macs that best fits my workflow. Yes, we can compare it to a PC, but it doesn't really make sense if the operating system is not something that you enjoy to use on a daily basis, right? The other thing too is that if you configure, and I've seen this done before, a equivalent PC for an equivalent price here with equivalent spec processors, it comes really close hand in hand with each other that I still think overall for me, being an Apple ecosystem, using iCloud and being able to sync everything, it's just something that is much more worthwhile to me to have a Mac Pro rather than to get a PC, even a self-building one where I can save the money. I mean, the synchronicity between all the Apple devices I own is just actually a peace of mind that I can't get on a PC end. So that's pretty much that. So this is my 2019 Mac Pro perspective review. Overall, I think that this is a great machine and it fits into my workflow and what I needed to do just fine. There are some programs that I mentioned, such as Lightroom Classic or Bridge, that it's not running optimally in some modules, and I feel that Adobe can just go in and update the code base in the future to optimize it for these machines. So it's not really a big problem there. Being able to use Lightroom to do advanced adjustment and have the computer be able to catch up with me, this is something that's really amazing that I love about this machine. And also being able to run Lightroom at multiple instances at any given time, that's also really awesome too. Overall, I really enjoy using this machine, especially when hooked up to my 232-inch BenQ hardware calibrated display. That has been great. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm also experimenting with hooking a third PD3220U up to the system. So if I do that, I'll make a video about that, let you know. But anyway, I hope that you find this video at least enlightening, if not helpful, if you're looking to buy a Mac, and some information in here, just as a great guidance. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. Give this video a like, subscribe if you're new, hit on the bell to be notified when I upload cool new contents like this. And until next time, ArtIsRight.